At 9:46 on the morning of September 13, 1971, a helicopter flew over D-Yard at Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York and dropped tear gas. Hundreds of state police, corrections officers, and sheriff's deputies came in behind it firing. The assault lasted under 15 minutes. When it ended, 39 people were dead or dying. At around 11 a.m., the New York Department of Corrections Public Information Officer Gerald Houlihan told reporters that the inmates had killed the hostages. 7 or 8 throats slit, he said. 1 hostage castrated. The autopsies came back within 24 hours. Every single hostage had been shot to death by police. No slit throats or castrations. Houlihan had made it up. To understand what that lie did, you need to know what the yard looked like in the hours after the retaking. The corrections officers and state troopers processing the surrendered prisoners had just been told falsely that their colleagues had been mutilated by the men now lying face down in front of them. Survivors described being stripped naked and forced to crawl across broken glass, beaten with nightsticks, shot after they'd already surrendered. Frank Big Black Smith, who'd served as the inmate's head of security during the 4-day standoff, testified that guards stripped him naked to a table, burned him with cigarettes, and told him they'd gut him if he dropped the football they placed on his stomach. These were the men who believed the lie Houlihan told them. The uprising had been building for months. Attica held about 2,200 prisoners in a facility built for 1,600. Most of the population was Black or Puerto Rican. Almost every guard was white. Inmates got 1 shower a week, 1 roll of toilet paper a month, and wages between 25 cents and $1 a day. In July 1971, prisoners sent a formal list of 27 demands to Corrections Commissioner Russell Oswald and Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Nothing happened. On September 9th, following a confrontation between guards and inmates in the exercise yard, 1,281 prisoners took D-Yard. 42 staff were taken hostage. 1 corrections officer, William Quinn, was fatally beaten in the initial chaos. For 4 days, prisoners negotiated. Civilian observers came into the yard. Tom Wicker of the New York Times, Congressman Herman Badillo, Attorney William Kunstler, among them. Oswald agreed to most of the reform demands. The sticking point was amnesty. With Quinn dead, no one could promise that. The observers begged Rockefeller to come to Attica in person 3 separate times. He refused each time. On September 12th, he and Oswald ordered the retaking. The McKay Commission, established by Rockefeller himself afterward, called the assault the bloodiest one-day encounter between Americans since the Civil War. Of the 43 total deaths across the entire uprising, 39 happened in the 15-minute retaking. Every hostage who died was killed by police fire. What followed was one of the most lopsided legal proceedings in American history. A Wyoming County grand jury spent the next several years building cases against the prisoners. 62 of them were indicted on 1,289 criminal counts, many carrying potential life sentences. Of the hundreds of state police and correction officers who had fired weapons into D-Yard, 1 was indicted. 1 trooper for reckless endangerment, for firing a shotgun into a crowd. His charges were later dropped. That was the entire law enforcement accountability for the deaths of 39 people. By 1976, it was over. A special prosecutor confirmed in writing what many already suspected, that the state police had deliberately failed to collect evidence of their own conduct at the scene. Shell casings uncatalogued, crime scene unsecured, a massacre treated not as a crime scene, but as a cleanup operation. Having acknowledged this prosecutor then dropped all remaining charges. Governor Carey declared he was closing the book on Attica, pardoned the inmates who pleaded guilty, and dismissed pending disciplinary actions against 20 law enforcement officers. He described the Attica prosecutions, the prosecutions of the prisoners as the darkest day in the history of New York State jurisprudence. Not the retaking or the lie, the prosecutions. The surviving inmates filed a lawsuit that dragged through the courts for 26 years. It settled in January 2000 for $8 million total, roughly $4,000 per person. When historian Heather Ann Thompson began researching the full record in the mid-2000s, she accessed boxes at the Erie County Courthouse, bloody prisoner clothing, survivor letters, photographs. Those materials have since been removed from public access. Documents she viewed at the New York State Museum in 2011 were also subsequently taken down. Her book Blood in the Water won the Pulitzer Prize in 2017. In it, she documented that the physical evidence of what happened at Attica had been gathered, held, and then made to disappear. Gerald Houlihan was never charged with anything. He gave a press conference, said something false, and walked away. Attica Correctional Facility is still open. In May 1928, a 23-year-old man named Clarence Buck Kelly was executed at San Quentin State Prison in California. He'd been convicted of shooting 3 people during a robbery in San Francisco. They hanged him. Then the prisoner's chief surgeon performed the autopsy and removed Kelly's testicles and implanted them into another prisoner. The surgeon's name was Leo Leonidas Stanley. He'd been the chief medical officer at San Quentin since 1913. He'd hold that position until 1951. By his own estimate, he performed over 10,000 procedures involving testicular material on prisoners during those 38 years, harvested from executed men or ground from the glands of goats, rams, boars, and deer. He believed this cured crime. Stanley arrived at San Quentin as a committed eugenicist. He believed that criminal behavior was caused by defective endocrine function, specifically testicular dysfunction. He believed the decline of white masculine vitality was a civilizational threat. And he believed the prison's captive population, disproportionately black and poor, gave him a controlled laboratory that no outside researcher could access. Subjects he could observe daily, operate on, and follow indefinitely. He wrote that prisoners were lucky to receive treatments that wealthy men in Europe were paying for. His first implantation was in 1918. 5 years into his tenure, he took the testicles of a young black executed prisoner and grafted them into a 72-year-old white inmate he classified as senile. He wrote that the man was as lively as a young colt within days. Between 1918 and 1927, he performed 30 human-to-human operations. When executions couldn't keep up with demand, he moved to animal glands, crushing them into a slurry and injected under the skin of the patient's abdomen. By 1940, over 10,000 procedures in total. He published his results in medical journals. In 1919, the United Press Dispatch described him as an international figure in the surgical world for the work. The underlying theory wasn't entirely fringe at the time. European researchers were publishing on testicular rejuvenation throughout the 20s, and serious newspapers were covering it. But by the time Stanley was doing this at scale, the science was already falling apart. Controlled studies weren't replicating the results. The improvements his prisoners reported were consistent with placebo effect in a place where any special medical attention was a reprieve from ordinary prison brutality. Stanley knew this was a possibility, so he wrote about it and kept going. Simultaneously, he was running San Quentin's sterilization program. California law permitted involuntary sterilization of prisoners up to a certain proportion. Stanley ran that proportion far beyond any other California prison. Roughly 600 prisoners sterilized by 1940, targeting men he identified as gay, intellectually deficient, or belonging to groups he considered genetically undesirable. He also built San Quentin's first racially segregated hospital wing. Racial segregation hadn't been formally enforced at San Quentin before he got there. The Kelly case put him briefly in public view. Kelly's family sued Stanley for mutilating a corpse after learning what had been done post-execution. The case reached court, but Stanley wasn't convicted. California newspapers ran it for a few days. Gland scandal in San Quentin. New gland quiz to be launched. Then the coverage died, and Stanley went back to work for another 23 years. In 1940, he published a memoir, Men at Their Worst. He described his prisoners with the detachment of a researcher writing about a study population. The book came out with a commercial publisher and received reviews. In 1951, he retired. He traveled the world, worked as a ship's physician, and kept writing. His entire archive, scrapbooks, correspondence, experimental records, photographs, multiple memoir drafts, is held at the California Digital Library. The finding aid is publicly accessible. He kept everything organized. The racial logic of what he did isn't something you have to read between the lines for. Leo Leonidas Stanley was never charged with anything. He died in 1976 at the age of 90 in his own bed. In 1835, a Tennessee businessman named Isaac Franklin began buying land along the Mississippi River in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana. He divided the property into 6 cotton plantations. One of them he named Angola, after the region of Africa where many of the enslaved people working it had been taken from. Franklin was also, at the time, the co-owner of the largest slave trading firm in the United States. By the time Franklin died in 1846, he owned 600 enslaved people and thousands of acres across multiple states. His Louisiana plantations passed to his widow and eventually to a former Confederate Army officer named Samuel Lawrence James, who in 1869 leased the labor of all Louisiana state prisoners and put them to work on the land. In 1880, he bought the Angola property outright and moved his leased prisoners onto it. In 1901, the state of Louisiana purchased the 8,000 acres from James's heirs and established the Louisiana State Penitentiary. The guards came on horseback. The prisoners worked the fields. Nothing else changed. Today, Angola is the largest maximum security prison in the United States. It covers 18,000 acres, larger than Manhattan. In a remote bend of the Mississippi River, flanked by water on 3 sides, roughly 75% of its population is Black. As of recent years, 74% of its inmates are serving life without parole, meaning most of the people working those fields will die there. The average sentence for those who aren't serving life is 90.9 years. Former warden, Burl Cain, who ran the facility for 2 decades, once explained his management philosophy plainly: keep inmates working all day so they're tired at night. They still pick cotton. That's not a metaphor. The farm line, Angola's compulsory agricultural labor program, assigns newly arrived prisoners to field work as a matter of standard intake. Being reassigned to the farm line is also used as a punishment for disciplinary infractions. Men harvest cotton, okra, potatoes, corn, and other crops by hand on their knees in the Louisiana heat, without modern agricultural tools, under the watch of armed guards on horseback. They earn between 2 cents and 20 cents an hour, if they're paid at all. The crops are sold on the open market through Prison Enterprises, a for-profit state agency. In a recent agricultural year, Angola grew and harvested wheat, corn, soybeans, cotton, and milo, selling the products commercially. In the summer, the heat index at Angola routinely exceeds 100 degrees. In the summer of 2024, it reached 122 degrees. Prisoners were in the fields anyway. In September 2023, Voice of the Experienced, a nonprofit founded by men who'd done time at Angola, filed a class action lawsuit alongside 4 current prisoners. It argued that the farm line, especially in Louisiana's summer heat, violated the 8th Amendment's protection against cruel and unusual punishment. The declarations attached to the filings read like testimony from a different century. Ray Faria described picking pecans when a white guard on horseback told him to get back in the field, calling him boy. Damaris Jackson, a sharecropper's grandson, wrote that being made to work a Louisiana cotton field alongside other black men produced a harm he could only describe one way. It made him feel like a slave. Patrick Jones put it simply: he never had a seat except the ground, never had shade except the corn and the okra. A federal judge reviewed the evidence and ordered the state to fix what he called the glaring deficiencies in how Angola protected the men it was forcing to work outdoors. No adequate shade, sunscreen, rest breaks, or accommodations for prisoners with medical conditions that made extreme heat dangerous. The state's response was a pop-up tent. Between the judge's order and the following month, more than 50 prisoners sought medical treatment for heat exposure, while Louisiana claimed to be in compliance. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the prisoners. The case was certified as a class action in December 2024, covering every person held at Angola. Trial began in Baton Rouge in February 2026. Louisiana's official position is that the farm line is rehabilitative. Its value, the state argued in court, is in giving men meaningful work and providing food for the prison population. There is a legal mechanism that has permitted this arrangement to continue. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which abolished slavery in 1865, contains an exception. It reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States." Angola was a plantation before it was a prison, but the men who work it today were born long after slavery ended, and most of them will die there.